Patrice, this is the interesting thing. There were these fence sitters, if you call it, Republicans who were in swing districts that Biden carried, who were a little concerned about taking a vote on an impeachment inquiry. I listened to a few of them over the weekend, and it's interesting because this Hunter Biden indictment has really helped them come over to the side of voting for an impeachment inquiry moving forward, because their view is Joe Biden lied. Joe Biden covered up. Joe Biden wasn't straight when he said that he had no knowledge of his son's businesses, when he said that he's done nothing wrong. And they're using that line of rationale as a reason to now vote for moving forward on an impeachment inquiry.
Oh, that's interesting. And I think it's an important movement among those fence sitters. I think a lot of, obviously, Democrats are looking for the check with Joe Biden's name written on it. And, whether we would ever see that is another story. But for the conservatives who've held their powder so far and kept their powder dry on this, I think they've been looking for something that's a little bit more substantive. And so if they do see this Hunter Biden indictment in California as that meat that they're looking for, then maybe then in having an impeachment inquiry vote, we would see that progress. And I'm hopeful for it, because I do think that there is more to come, more evidence that the American people need to see. I think a lot of us have already been convinced that the president's son was peddling influence with his dad, and that President Biden, as Vice President Biden, very much was involved in these shenanigans. But there are a lot of independents who still may be swayed. Well, maybe this will, there would be more to come out of this that would sway those people's decisions, especially if President Biden is at the top of the ticket next year. But that's still even a question within itself.
Actually, Hayek, the thing that I thought was funny is Hunter's lawyer came out and said he's only being charged because his last name is Biden. Okay, that might be true, but you don't get $1 million contracts for doing nothing with no experience if your name isn't Biden. So it's sort of like you got yourself into this because you're a Biden, and now you're facing the consequences of it because you're a Biden. Also, you probably wouldn't have gotten the sweetheart deal in the first place that you turned down if your name wasn't Biden. But these are serious. I mean, he didn't pay $1.4 million in taxes. I think the Democrats are generally opposed to the rich not paying their taxes.
Well, and his art projects. I mean, I wish I could color on a piece of paper and sell it for the amount of money that he sold it for, or use it to pay off my child's custody.
You just need to apply yourself more.
Clearly,
you just need to try harder,
I'm way
Ashley.
behind here, way behind. But it's so interesting to me that these Republicans in the Biden plus whatever seats are nervous, because if you look at Joe Biden's polling right now, it's not doing very well. So I kind of imagine that some of those constituents would be grateful that they would give way to the opportunity for new leadership in the White House, regardless if you're a Republican or Democrat, because this is the worst president in history, with a very corrupt son who is leaving his crack maybe in the White House. I don't know. And just behaving completely abhorrently, and then also using the American people, our country, his dad, to make deals and get rich. Like, it's everything that we, the people, regardless of your political party, completely despise. And yet here is this kid running all over the place, all around the world, making money and pocketing it. It's insane. And the evidence is there. I think from where I'm sitting, and I'm not, I was not as intimately involved, obviously, as Congressman was in all of the previous impeachment hearings and everything else, but I've seen enough. It's time to move forward and do it quickly before we lose the opportunity.
Doug, last week, and just bear with me as I make the connection, Jamal Bowman was censured, the congressman from New York, by the House for pulling that fire alarm. He pled guilty to a misdemeanor in D.C. court. And yet, when it came down to getting his censure, the Democrats rallied around him, not just physically, which they did on the House floor. Then they issued statements about how this was attacking a man of color, all of this stuff. I mean, he literally pled guilty. There is no ambiguity in the charge or him taking, accepting guilt for it. And yet the Democrats' answer was, we're going to rally around this guy and we're going to make him a hero and a martyr for what he did. Right. I mean, and like I said, no question that he actually committed the crime. He pled guilty to it. He's taking the whatever the fine is. But here's why I say that. Is there a concern in your mind that we go after Biden, we impeach him for all of these nefarious things, we connect the dots, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and the Democrats try to get everyone to rally around? This is the one thing. Right now, you talk to them about immigration, you talk to them about the economy, and Democrats are divided. They don't want, I mean, all these polls, Joe Biden's not our guy. We don't want him. Does this become potentially the catalyst that unites Democrats because they can't stand his border policies? They can't stand his economic policies. They watch him fall down all the time. Are we potentially making a political mistake by impeaching this guy?
Potentially. I mean, I'm not going to say you can't, because we're at a 50-50-ish country right now in a lot of ways. And so, I mean, anything can sort of swing it going back. The concern I have, and Ashley sort of touched on this then, is timing. I mean, we're here in December. I think that's the reason Weiss actually indicted Hunter last week, was because it was getting close to the end of the year. He didn't want to do it in January. He'd been embarrassed already before. And if he did it in 2024, there would be cries from Democrats saying you're doing this during an election year, literally during an election year. So I think you're looking at this. The other issue here is, will they do it right? Or will they simply do 2 or 3 hearings and have no rebuttal witnesses, which I think is necessary here. Because if you're going to make this, if you're going to try and make the case to the American public, and you just simply put up, like they did in New York against Donald Trump, you just simply put up prosecution kind of case in a grand jury, people are going to, have doubts about that. They don't like Joe Biden. They're trying to find a way not to like Joe Biden even further. And, knowing that when this goes to the Senate, it dies automatically. I think it has to be done properly. Can it backfire? Yes, to a point, but I think the negatives on Joe Biden are also high enough that it simply reinforces, if the Republicans in the House do it properly, it will get out. The media will have to cover this. This is not something they can ignore. They can spin it however they want to spin it, but they can't ignore it. So I think that's going to be the interesting issue. But then the other part goes back into is, are we spending the time on the impeachment, and we're sort of, I'll say, sloughing off the budget, the 2 CRs, the defense authorization, these kind of things that we could actually show to the constituents, say, hey, we cut a little bit here, we made a little gain here, we worked on the DEI stuff, we worked on some other things. That's more my concern at this point in the process.
Patrice Onwuka, do you agree with that, or is there a concern for you? I think Doug brings up a great point. I mean, as a former member, how many balls can you have in the air at once?
Well, I'd like to think that they can do a few things. I mean, certainly we saw I know, maybe I'm optimistic. Obviously, the hearings we saw with the 3 elite university presidents was great. And the investigation that's now being launched into a number of different institutions of higher education around anti-Semitism on campus. I don't want detractions from that. But at the same time, I still think it's important that there is so much that could be learned and garnered from an impeachment inquiry. So I understand the timeline, and I understand all of the other fine budgetary and other things that we're running up against. Certainly, I think mid-January is the next issue that we have to come up, that Congress is going to be facing when it comes to a budget perspective. But I think that there are enough people, enough staff to help get something done, and done within enough time before at least Super Tuesday, before some of the bigger electoral days, and give the American people information that I'm sure a lot of people wish they had going into 2020. Because my mind reminds me that some polling post 2020, if people knew about even the laptop from hell, that they would not have voted for President Biden. And so that could have been enough to change the election results. So that kind of information could make a difference.
I agree. It's funny you say that. I think back in 2016, we had the fake Russia hoax. In 2020, you had all of the other, the laptop and all of the other. I mean, it's amazing. I just kind of wonder what do we got in store for 2024?